Donald Trump dismisses people as soon as he views them as problems for him. Okay. Not necessarily problems for you, right? Because if you were to ask me who the cabinet secretary that should be the most vulnerable to being fired, I think the easy answer is Robert Kennedy Jr., right? The measles outbreak, yet another record number of Americans contracting measles. Um, I, it is hard for me to sit here and say that this is an issue that is beyond the influence of one person, right? I mean, Kennedy. I don't want to say Kennedy alone is responsible for this, but Kennedy is the North Star of this movement that has suddenly that has made measles a disease now, a childhood disease that we thought we had pretty much eradicated, at least in the United States, is coming back in full force. And I think this is one of those cases. It's directly him. It is directly him, this movement, mainstreaming this nonsense, making people question all this. I think this is and you'll hear me talk about it a little bit with Nathan Gonzalez. I think it's a under the radar issue that is going to harm the chances of some Republican candidates in suburban districts, and the suburban districts are the swing districts, and being outside the mainstream of exposing kids to a disease that there's no business having them exposed to, but for these bizarre conspiracy theories about vaccines that Kennedy has been championing. So on paper, and when you look at his record, there's no bigger failure already in this administration. Nobody has put more people in harm's way, put more people's health at risk than this lone individual. In fact, I think we should name this measles variant measles RFK, just in the same way we had COVID-19, right? Because it was a virus that first debuted in 2019. This is a virus that has been reanimated by arguably one person and the leadership of one person, and that is the health secretary, Bobby Kennedy Jr. But for all intents and purposes, despite what I think is catastrophic decision making by him and these vaccine panels, I mean, it's one of these stories. I'm like, if I were running a major news organization right now, and I were looking for an issue that matters to more people, that has a bigger impact, I'll tell you what I wouldn't be covering is the Epstein story. I know that gets clicks, and that's the shiny metal object. What's happening at the Health and Human Services Department, what Kennedy is doing, the number of people potentially in harm's way that he has put people, what they've done to vaccines, this is doing to pediatricians all over the country, the nightmare. This, to me, this is the story. This is a bigger story than anything else that's happening. I would argue in many of the things that we're focused. There's no doubt the tariffs are going to be important. There's plenty of important stories and important developments and important things that the Trump administration is trying to do, is doing, and I understand that there's a lot of choices to make when it comes to what angle are you going to be a dog with a bone? Well, I'll tell you, in the place I would be looking, and because it's in some ways this is an area that should be apolitical, right? In the area that we have politicized everything, right? Politicizing of vaccines, and yes, you can say, well, we've had vaccine, political fights before, but it's always been operated on the fringes. This has got into the mainstream, and more importantly, it is directly impacting the health of children in this country right fricking now. So I say this in that Kennedy never should have gotten there. I think there is no doubt that Bill Cassidy is the Louisiana senator who was essentially the swing vote on whether or not Kennedy. There's a lot of reporting evidence that had Cassidy voted no in that committee, 3 or 4 other Republicans would have followed him. Kennedy would never have gotten out of committee, and he wouldn't have gotten confirmed into this post. Cassidy took Kennedy at his word, and it turned out Kennedy lied to him. I understand the political pickle Senator Cassidy has himself in. It's a re-election year. I think he is somebody that votes look, this is a guy that is willing to take a tough vote, right? He voted to convict President Trump after January over his actions or lack of actions in both cases on January 6th. So I'm not going to sit here and say Cassidy has been rolling over or anything like that. But at some point, he's going to have to address this and admit that Kennedy just out and out lied to him. And what are the consequences to that? We'll see. Maybe we saw with Tom Tillis, once Tillis finally decided he wasn't running for reelection, he became Senator Bulworth, right? And if you're wondering what that reference is, it's a fun movie from the 90s. Warren Beatty plays a senator who decides, I don't give a shit anymore, and literally lets it all fly. And he goes full. It became a thing when somebody decided, I'm gonna tell truths that are uncomfortable or tell truths that will be politically incorrect, however you want to look at it. As a political reporter, we always we love when any politician decides to suddenly become a Bulworth type of figure, if you will, willing to say things that will make their own party upset and just sort of speak truth to power in a way, regardless of the consequences, politically, electorally, etc. But what is every day, I think about this every day that you see the harm that Kennedy is doing to this country, to the health of kids left and right. It is, I know it's a political nightmare for Cassidy, but at some point, I think he's going to have to address it. So I set that aside. And politically, Trump does owe Kennedy. I do believe Kennedy was the gateway drug for voters who were not very comfortable with Trump, but didn't like Biden, and then were looking for a way to Trump. Kennedy was that bridge, and I do think it was more helpful to Trump than I think folks realize, keeping him out of there. I do believe Kennedy was more of a problem. Had Kennedy stayed on the ballot, that he was taking potential voters away from Trump than Kennedy, even though the Democrats treated him as if he was a bigger threat to them. At the end of the day, RFK has created this movement. He has led this movement, and then Trump put him in a position to weaponize this movement and use the power of government to endorse these fringe ideas. And, this is the real danger of Trump 2.0 here. When you put people like Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, Bobby Kennedy Jr., who are conspiracy theorists, who made their name as conspiracy theorists, who, I don't know what to believe. I think, Kennedy, I guess I shouldn't question whether he really believes this stuff. I guess he does. But he has zero credibility, and there is nothing in his background that gives him credibility on these issues. In my opinion, there's nothing he's done. There's nothing he's studied to me that gives him credibility on these issues. And yet he's seen as the answer on all this stuff. So, you ask, why is this more of an RFK issue than the Trump issue? Well, it's because RFK created this. Trump just borrowed Kennedy because Kennedy was important to him. He was losing votes to Kennedy in a three-way race. Getting Kennedy in, and this was the political deal he cut. I guess you got to give Trump credit for keeping his word of nominating him to the one job he wanted, which was to destroy the vaccine policy of the United States and at HHS. But look, I think there's a lot of things they've done that are going to potentially create long-term damage and long-term consequences. But we are the trust in government issues, whether it's the missing weapons of mass destruction with Iraq, the looking the other way, holding nobody accountable for the Great Recession and the financial catastrophe. I understand that government the government's word hasn't been very good with the public for a couple of decades now. But this administration may put it in a place where it's unrecoverable, that it's going to take decades for the government to get its trust of the public back. But there's no doubt in my mind that Kennedy, Kash Patel, Bongino in particular, all they're doing is making the country less trusting of government. by their actions every single day.